All right, Andrea, it's quiz time. Weight Watchers, Scarsdale,
Scarsdale Diet,
The Zone, South Beach,
Zone,
Beverly Hills, Keto, Atkins, Paleo,
Paleo, the Master Cleanse. That's the Beyonce one with the lemonade and the maple syrup. Then I forgot there was this fiber diet that I did one time where I made these muffins that I thought were really good, but it was kind of like when people ate them, it was like a colonoscopy cleanse. But I thought they were good, but
These are really good, but I'll be right back.
It was kind of like colon blow, I guess, before. And it worked, but as Dr. Cooper said, for how long?
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to another edition of Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's great to see you both.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
All right. This is episode number 8, Fad Diets, and specifically the history, wait for it, of low-carb diets. So, Andrea, we've talked about this in the past. You were put on a diet at the age of 8, and you have tried every fad diet there is, and we could name them, Weight Watchers, Scarsdale, The Zone, South Beach, Beverly Hills, Keto, Atkins, Paleo, all of those. You've tried every fad, right?
Well, I have not done paleo and the intermittent fasting ones. Those are past my time. But I've done most of the cities. I've done, and Weight Watchers was the first one when I was around 8. I think I started it with my mom, and then I think my whole family, we all had to do it because my mother was doing it. So she was like, well, I'm doing it. That's what we're having for dinner. And, we learned how to do all kinds of things. Like I have said before, we learned how to slice a piece of bread into 3 pieces. We learned how to make all kinds of things fairly tasty, but not great. The portions were way small. But we counted points. I think that was a points one. We learned all kinds of things. We've been on the grams one. We did Atkins where we ate a lot of bacon. So my brother and my father were really thrilled with that one because it was steak and bacon. And then it was sort of like, is there salad? Like I never really had craved salad in my life, but it was like, maybe we should have a little broccoli or some salad or something.
It's like pass the bacon, right?
Yeah, but they were thrilled with the bacon. I mean, it was a lot of bacon. And they as we've said before, they all worked for that time until we were like, I can't do it anymore. I can't, I just can't. I just need to be normal again. And then the weight would all come back. And usually I'd be reading like 17 magazine, even though I was like 12. And I'd see a new one that some fashion model said that they were on, and I would do that. And I didn't know at the time, because I didn't know science, that that was what was destroying my metabolism and making it worse. Had no idea.
So, Dr. Cooper, we've talked about why carbs are actually good for you in previous episodes, but let's talk about the history of fad diets. Until we had our discussions, I had no idea some of these diets are hundreds of years old, and I that kind of surprised me because actual science really didn't evolve until fairly recently. So how is it that fad diets even started several hundred years ago?
Yeah. And the funny thing is the today's fad diets are just different versions of the ones that were created hundreds of years ago when there wasn't the science behind them. So that is kind of alarming. But yeah, I guess they've always been popular. People have always been trying to look for ways to control their food. And doctors, unfortunately, are behind the invention of most of the diets that we see today. And they started way back in at least the 1700s. It probably does go back further than that, but that's as far as I could trace it reliably, through the medical journal articles and things. It's very interesting. But in the 1700s, they were putting people on very low starch diets. It kind of similar to Atkins if you think about it, because it was meat, a lot of meat, and no starches at all, and very little fruits and veggies, if any, and usually none. And then that just different iterations of that type of diet just persisted over the next couple of centuries, the next few centuries now. And I think it really was the Atkins quote, wasn't it? He called it the new diet revolution.
The diet revolution.
Revolution to kind of make it
Yeah.
seem like it was brand new. And I think he even used the word new, the new diet revolution.
I think that was his second
Oh,
book.
maybe that was the second. Yeah. And but he's the one that really created the blueprint, I think, for the marketable diets. And I mean, he was an amazing marketer when you think about it.
Mhm.
But his blueprints, what's used with every single diet that we've seen, whether it is paleo or it's keto or it's basically all of the modern diets have a foundation of low starch.
Hmm.
All of them do, even though they claim maybe not to. But yeah, I would say out of all our patients that come to the clinic, at least 95 to 99% of them have been on low carb diets primarily.
Dr. Cooper, give me sort of a patient profile, if you would, of a typical patient who has tried every fad diet. I don't know, Andrea has had a lot of experience with this, but like how much of your patient base is that person like Andrea who's tried all these fad diets and nothing worked?
Huge percent. Huge percent of our patients are people with similar stories, as Andrea has shared, where starting out at a young age, that it was almost like a diet sport in their household, like Andrea is
Mhm.
describing. I call it diet sport kind of because it's like everybody get on the team and we're on and the kids get pulled in and people I've even seen people who were in the family that didn't have originally any kind of a weight problem, but they were trying to be supportive. And then that caused their metabolism to get thrown off over the years. And they ended up with a weight problem secondary to that initial dieting experience. So I have all types of patients, but I'd say there's not there. I have no patients in my practice who come in that have not been on a multitude of diets in the past trying to solve their problems that way.
Hmm. We talked in the carbs episode about why these low carb diets work in the beginning. If people haven't heard that episode, if you would explain once again why cutting out carbs does lead to some pretty dramatic weight loss in the beginning.
Yeah, and that really is what kind of lures people into the low carb diets and why they keep going back to those low carb diets. It's because initially, when you cut out carbs in your diet, your body actually dumps out a lot of water weight because carbohydrates are stored with a lot of water in our body. We don't store a lot of carbs in our body, but the carbs we do store are stored with lots of water and mostly in our muscle mass. So you've probably heard that muscle mass is almost all water. And that's largely because of the carbohydrates that are stored within the muscle that are stored with few molecules of water for every molecule of carbs. And so as that happens, once you cut out the carbs, you're basically dehydrating and eliminating that water weight. And so you'll see that scale move down right away. And that is what leads people to think they're losing a lot of body fat when it's really not.
Right. So those first 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a first month,
Yeah.
you're like, well, this is fantastic diet. It's really, really working. And I mean, you see it like you see in a magazine. Oh, well, this celebrity or this person, they really, they are following it and it really, really worked. Look how great she looks. Look at this. This is fantastic. And I'm doing it too. And I look great. And I'm going to be just like her. So you really are suckered in. It's very, very sneaky. And if you start when you're young and you're, kind of easily influenced, that's how it starts. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to get hooked into these things. And, once you start, it is very easy to keep on doing them. I mean, we're all a little dumb when it comes to losing weight and being suckered into these things. We forget, oh, it, the weight all came back. Right, right. You forget that it didn't.
Well,
You blame yourself
right.
and you say, I did something wrong. I messed it up.
And diet companies and marketers are just hoping that you'll feel that way, more down on yourself, that, well, maybe you ate these carrots and you weren't supposed to have that much starch. Maybe it was
Right,
your fault because you ate, grapes or
right,
something like that. Something ridiculous that
right.
patients tell me, that they think it's their fault because they
Yeah.
did this or that. But yeah, they've really figured out how to prey on people's vulnerabilities. And I think because we don't have a conversation about it, that's why this podcast is so great, a great opportunity, because we're getting some of this out in the open, because it's what people are thinking, as far as I know, because my patients are always surprised to hear that other people are going through the same thing that they've been going through. And so I think once that is really more out in the open, there'll be more conversations, about what really happens when people go on diet after diet after diet and how that affects their metabolism.
I know, Dr. Cooper, that you spend a lot of time looking at the research related to metabolism. As a consumer, do you have any advice on how we can evaluate information? I get articles almost every day from reputable news organizations that, oh, this new,
Yeah.
diet, and but how do we know to evaluate, and what should we look for when we're trying to evaluate whether these quote unquote fad diets work or not?
Well, the biggest thing I think is beware of headlines, because you'll read the headlines and get one idea of what this article's about. Then you read the article, it's the absolute polar opposite a lot of the time.
Hmm.
So the conclusions they make in the headlines very frequently do not match up with what the actual articles is saying. It can be the opposite. So that's the first step, is don't just go by headlines. Read the full article to understand. And if it quotes a research study and you're kind of scientific, maybe click on the research study and even read that. Um, but it is tough. And I think with real reputable research, another really important thing to look at is the number of subjects in the research studies. Is this a small group of, they looked at 20 people that aren't even like you, maybe college age males, which is a lot of the group that they look at. Um,
Hmm.
and was it a short-term study that looked at what happens over a 6-week or 12-week or even a 6-month period? Or is this a long-term study over 5 years? So you've got to look at this. Or maybe it was even not even a human study. It was in rodents or, mice or something. And so
Hmm.
many times I see patients buy into supplements and diets and things based on pseudoscience, something that was seen and observed in mice. One study of mice that were exposed to a certain abnormal condition that has nothing to do with what humans would be exposed to.
Hmm.
And based on that, the marketers can sell, multi-millions of dollars worth of a supplement or hook millions of people onto a diet. So just beware. Andrea's probably really good at advice in this area, because she knows all the tricks that the marketers use to,
Right,
yeah.
because supplements don't have to be regulated by the FDA, so they can kind of say whatever they want.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of claims that you can make pretty easily. Um, but I always say follow the money, follow where something is coming from, because that is, and it's also really, really horrible. Like where things are advertised, especially now with social media. Like I'll look on my Instagram because I'm marketed things all the time because I'm a consummate shopper. And I'll get things like I'll be reading a story or I'll be reading something on some site that I want to read something about. And even something that I'm reading that's a healthy story, like a good story that has sponsored content, and it'll be sponsored by some intermittent fasting
Mhm.
application that I'm supposed to buy or some diet that I'm supposed to buy because it's a story about health. And the ad that is sponsoring the content is the exact opposite of what I'm reading. And that drives me crazy, and there's nowhere to write in and say, "You should look and see who's sponsoring your content." And it's so frustrating.
Mhm.
I think there are two hallmarks to these fad diets. One is they all claim to have discovered some hack that's a shortcut to weight loss, and supplements too. Andrea, I mean,
Oh,
I saw an ad on Instagram the other day that, and I read it. It was written like a news article, ironically, and a PhD student at a university in California has discovered this salt compound
ooh.
that is causing people to lose 30 to 40 pounds in a month.
Do you lick
And
it?
but it just goes to, I mean, yeah, not regulated by the FDA. They can make any claim they want, and it is just absolute
Bullshit.
crap
It's
that
just
they're
a
making
bunch
money.
of
And
junk.
so the two hallmarks, one is that they all claim to have a hack. The second is somebody's making money, like you said.
Right.
Right.
How much, Andrea, when you were back in the day trying all these diets, I mean, how much money would you shell out for these diets?
Well, oh, I did do a liquid goo diet that, like, I mean, literally, to a friend of mine and I did it during college. We drank like teaspoons of this liquid goo for like, I think a couple of months.
Mm.
Um, that and we lost a lot of weight because all we did was eat this liquid goo. I think we had like one meal a day or
Oh.
something. We did have headaches. We had a lot of headaches, but we had this liquid goo. It was kind of expensive, but I think we got a deal or something because there were two of us, and I think it was probably like a precursor to Slim Fast type of
Mm.
thing.
Hmm.
But it was gross. It was really gross. It was thick, and that was supposed to be nutritious. I went to a lot of doctors that had programs, and they were always very giddy. Like when they would give you the supplement that you had, um, and they were really just like in it for the money. But they were, I mean, they were doctors, and they would give you these shakes. I did a lot of different shakes that were, and I always thought that they were better because they were coming from a doctor. But I mean, they were thousands of dollars,
Hmm.
and obviously never covered by insurance, never. But you would go and they would like weigh you in, and there was some nutritionist offering you some sort of plastic food, counseling. It was I mean, it was awful, and they would, weigh you in every week to see how you were doing, and they were all medically supervised. They were these medically supervised clinics. Always, they would spring up across the country. I did a bunch of those, a bunch of them. And like I said, they always worked. And you would lose, I mean, I would lose like 75 to 100 pounds on them
Mhm.
because, as Dr. Cooper said, I was starving.
And then it came back,
And
and then
then it
some, right?
always came back plus. Yeah, always came back plus.
Yeah. So one thing we should probably cover, Dr. Cooper, is the fact that these carbs that a lot of these diets deprive you of, they're super important for fueling the body. And so if you could break down the health benefit and value of carbs, that would be great.
Yeah, well, in addition to being good for cancer prevention, diabetes prevention, obesity prevention, like the whole group of whole grains is in our carbohydrate bucket, and those are known to be really beneficial. But carbs are also nicknamed the protein sparing macronutrient because when we have adequate carbs, we don't have to turn to our muscle mass and our immune system to scavenge there for proteins to break down and convert into carbohydrates and to glucose. So, if we get adequate carbs in the diet, we preserve our other proteins in our body that are used for our immune system and our muscles, tendons, ligaments, things like that. So once we cut them out, then we are running the risk of depleting our muscle mass and depleting our immune system of the proteins that it needs to stay healthy.
And we should also cover the idea, Dr. Cooper, that there's no real science that backs up these fad diets, is there? I mean, if they had a legitimate scientific study that said long term eating no carbs or low carbs, gets you this result, we could roll that out and show everybody that, right?
Yeah, and I think the key word is long term that you said, because they can show you hundreds of studies that show short term changes that they're interpreting as being beneficial. Um, but a lot of assumptions are made with those short term studies, and they're not always correct. There can be changes that are interpreted as beneficial when, in fact, they're kind of a warning sign that something is going to actually go awry within if you continue on that path. So I think that the studies that are done that are short term, there's very little kind of in-depth interpretation given to what would happen in the very long term of real life situations. As I say, in a lab environment or short-term environment, that's not real life. So if you are really trying to figure out whether these things can be beneficial, you have to really look at least a 5-year profile of what happens, and you'd have to actually create a real life situation and not a laboratory type situation in order to test them. So what I go by are the clinical evidence that I've seen over 3 decades and the long-term research that I've seen. And when you look that way, there's very little out there that would convince you that depriving yourself of food groups and going from one fad diet to the next is really going to benefit you at all. And in fact, why would you have to switch these from one fad diet to the next if you were, if they were quote working? So, this is what the diet industry banks on, is the fact that they don't work. So you'll be looking for the next one. And most likely, if you look at when you say follow the money, who is profiting off of these, it could be that one entity is pushing 3 different diets at all times that they're not really invested in their one diet. They're just invested in getting you on a diet.
Right. A lot of publishers, a lot of, it makes for a good content on a morning TV show. And, the thing is, let's face it, most people have very short attention spans. And when it comes to losing weight, you want a quick solution. You don't want to think about what's going on over a 3-decade span
Yeah.
of information. You want, like, well, I want to lose the weight now. And you want to lose it the fastest way possible. And it's like, if this diet says that I can lose 20 pounds in 4 days or whatever, whatever it is, you're like, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it. And we know it's not rational. Your brain, I mean, most of us know that it's not rational, but you're like, well, maybe it'll work. Maybe this is the one. This is the one. And so, you just think that it'll work, and it's not going to work, but you think it might work. So that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a long time ago that gambling is something that I shouldn't do because I always lost money. Not a
Mm-hmm.
lot, just like $10, $20 here and there. But so when we used to bowl in college at an invitational in Las Vegas, so we got to go down to Vegas around Christmas time every year. And you walk through Vegas and you see these massive casinos, and you realize by the fact that they're massive casinos that more people lose than win.
Mhm.
Yep.
And you can look at the diet industry in this country and deduce the same thing because it's a multi-billion-dollar machine.
Mhm.
And if even one or two of them worked, guess what?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
industry would die and they would lose billions of dollars that they're currently making. And the thing that makes me most frustrated, I think, is that, like you said, Dr. Cooper, all of these cause short-term weight loss, which makes you think that it's working.
Mhm.
Right.
And then they just capture you all over again when you rebound and gain more weight.
Yeah.
And then they're just preying on the most vulnerable people in
Yeah.
our society who are just trying to get healthy and just trying to lose the weight. And I think that's just unconscionable.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know. It's like tobacco company executives. How do you sleep at night?
Right.
Like, how do you sleep at night
Right.
taking people's money, putting them on these diets that are actually bad for them?
Well, and it's
I don't get it.
it's frustrating too that it's so intertwined with the medical community that makes it
Mm,
very confusing for
yeah.
people out there because it, as Andrea said, most of the diets she was on were actually prescribed by doctors that she saw. And doctors, even today, there's a mantra out there, well, the best diet is the one you can stay on. And that's what doctors tell their patients.
Right.
And that's just so irresponsible too. And I think that clouds it and it makes it very difficult for people to make good choices because they're relying on their healthcare professional to, give them that beneficial advice. But unfortunately, the diet mentality or diet culture is basically woven into all of our institutions in this country.
Well, and I think all these trainers at gyms are sort of forced into telling their clients about a diet or a way to eat, and then some of them think, "Oh, I can make money by, I have all these great clients. I could write a book and make money doing that." And they're not professionals.
Mm-mm. No, and it puts a lot of pressure on exercise professionals and dietitians to put them in a role where they're supposed to solve this weight issues for their clientele because if the more they know about science, the more they know they can't. Really that's not something that they have the capacity to do. Um, but it's just not an honest conversation with their clients typically. I mean, I'm not
Right.
accusing, I mean, I know a lot of very responsible dietitians and exercise physiologists too that don't go in that direction. But I think you're right, Andrea. It depends on where you work and what the organization is trying to promote if you get roped into that as an employee.
Right.
Dr. Cooper, let's talk about, I mean, if these fad diets worked, we would not have an obesity epidemic and a prediabetes and diabetes epidemic. What do the numbers say about the trend toward obesity in America? Where are we on that?
Oh, we're not good. It's like approaching 50% now of adults. I mean, it's 40 something percent, but from what I've been reading, it's increasing. And a while back, they tried to celebrate that pediatric obesity was reducing, but it wasn't really true. It was just this tiny slice. If they sliced and diced a certain age group, they could work the numbers that way, but it was really that it was increasing. And we're not getting anywhere with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, heart disease, which is potentially linked also to metabolic dysfunction. So we're not doing well.
What is the link between obesity and diabetes?
That's a great question. It's a lot of people think that obesity causes diabetes. And really, contrary to that, it's not really the case. It's more that there's underlying metabolic dysfunction that causes obesity in some people as a symptom of that dysfunction and can cause elevated glucose levels as another symptom in some people. And so it's that underlying metabolic dysfunction that the both of those conditions may share this same underlying what we call pathophysiology, which is like the basis of the disease process. And so that's why you'll see that these both of these entities can respond to similar treatment strategies. but that's how they're
Yeah.
linked.
Wow, that's very interesting. And again, if these fad diets worked, we wouldn't be seeing those numbers
wouldn't be there.
going in the direction that
No.
they're going.
Mm-mm.
Wow. Well, this has been really interesting. Fad diets and the history of low carb diets. Anything in summary from either of you, Andrea? Anything to sort of tie a bow on this?
Fad diets, don't go there.
And this is from someone who spent thousands and thousands of dollars
Doing them all,
over decades.
well, a lot of them.
Which makes me just happy looking at you now, and the fact that you are in the health that you're in now through the care of Dr. Cooper, and the same with me. I mean, I was headed in the wrong direction, and this stuff works. Science, there is, if there's anything that we're learning in this podcast, is that you can apply science to metabolism and to health and to weight. And if you do that, then you're going to be taking the right steps toward getting healthy. Because we've talked about this in the past, Dr. Cooper, that just because you may have more weight than you'd like doesn't necessarily mean that you're unhealthy.
Absolutely. Yep, that's true. We always say that you cannot tell what's going on inside from the outside. And you can have a lot of excess weight and have perfect blood pressure, perfect cholesterol, perfect glucose, be as healthy as can be. And then, you can be a completely normal weight and suffer from all of those conditions. So we definitely don't want to use weight as a gauge of someone's health.
So any final thoughts on fad diets, Dr. Cooper, before we wrap up?
I would say just leave it alone. Don't play with your food, and get your social connections through a different avenue than teaming up with others that are on the same diet plan.
Yeah. Because eventually they'll probably be in your office.
Yeah.
or really unhappy
Mhm.
and unhealthy.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. This has been another edition of Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. Thanks so much, you two.
It's been fun.
Bye-bye. No diets, no agendas, just science to make you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.